When I was writing Conversations from Room 1170, there was this entire other book's worth of stuff that I wanted to talk about, but had to leave out for the sake of brevity. Obviously, the book would have been, this thick. I'm not usually concerned with brevity. I'm a lot like Treebeard, in Lord of the Rings. Sometimes uh, anything worth saying takes a very long time to say. I just thought that it would be helpful to other people who I know kind of read the blog or reading the blog or coming to the site for the first time to talk about some of this stuff. If they're going through medical crisis or something similar, or whatever, and this would be maybe a better format to do that in. If you haven't watched the video that I did called My Transplant Journey, it's about 30 minutes long, but I would really encourage you to watch that first or find it on YouTube just for context. The short of it is that I had a heart transplant roughly 3 years ago, and I actually started experiencing heart failure, however, nearly 20 years ago. I was about 28 years old, and it was not a quick process. Obviously, it was not a brief medical crisis. It was not a bump in the road. It radically altered my life's trajectory. So you kind of, if you're watching this, you know the end of the story. Spoiler alert: I'm alive and well, but and I've detailed kind of how all that started in the other video. But I think, like any good story, it kind of starts with a bang. It ended well for me, but the meat of it is really there in the middle. That's the important. It's not the most important part, obviously, because I don't want to diminish what my donor did for me and what his family did for me. But for us, the difficult part, the real test, was in the middle. That's where we found out what we were made of, to be honest. And I talk about that middle part of the story a lot because I think it's something that resonates with people. Everybody's in the middle of something. It maybe not a crisis necessarily, but it could just be the middle of your career, the middle of a move, or middle of raising kids, whatever it is. Life is full of these things that are constantly unresolved. And you fix one problem and another pops up, or you finish one thing and now you got five more things. It's this eternal game of whack-a-mole. So I've talked about the details of that middle part extensively in some other videos, but I wanted to just spend a moment, again, something I really could not get into in the book, but I wanted to talk a little bit about this idea of finding contentment in that middle section of whatever it is when you're in the middle of that storm. Uh, the journey for me was very long. It was very difficult in a lot of ways. So much so I had to write a book to go into all of it. But I learned a lot about contentment along the way. And I want to be really careful to note there. I did not say that I was content while this was happening, or that I learned to be content. I just said that I learned a lot about contentment. So see, there's a difference. I also don't mean that I was always satisfied. I feel like I'm probably one of the most dissatisfied people. Being kind of a skeptic like I am, and all of that, I find that I'm unsatisfied with so many things. I'm unsatisfied with the government and Comcast, as a whole list, the state of the music industry, and the lack of Indian food in my hometown, and I could go on and on, as my wife and kids know, the number of checkers at the grocery store on a given day. We all have these lists, right? But I'm talking more about learning to be content in the middle part of whatever that is that's going on. When there's always that initial bam, and what the heck's going on? Oh my gosh, and this shock of whatever that crisis is, or at the beginning of something that's maybe very exciting. But when you start to get into that middle part and it starts to plateau, you begin to realize this is now the norm. This is the status quo for me. That, is a difficult time to learn to be content if you're not where you want to be, or it's something you didn't choose. So, I had 17 years where all of this for me was just circling the drain. And I really would like to be sitting here saying that I was perfectly at peace and patient and content and happy. But of course I wasn't. I was living minute to minute. I knew at various points along the way that some of these really high goals I'd set for myself were just not achievable, that they were just beyond my physical capabilities anymore. I was not going to have a career in music. I was not going to become a published author. I was not going to, be able to get the degrees that I had worked toward. So started to ask myself some of these questions. What do I do now in these small moment to moment situations? Am I being kind to my nurses? Am I appreciative to my wife as she's struggling to maintain normalcy for our family during some of this? Do my kids know how proud I am of them? Do they know that I support them? Do my friends know that I value them? You have to think about it this way. If you and try to put yourself in the position for a minute. If you're reduced to living in a hospital room with a plastic heart and you have no idea that you'll ever get a real one, that's a one-way ticket. When you have that implanted, you can't get the old one back. There's not a new one coming anytime soon. So you're on a course and you can't control what's going to happen from that point. All striving pretty much ceases. If you can imagine that. If you think about the thing that you're striving for, whatever it is, money, power, convenience, it could be anything. How much that occupies your energy and our thoughts and emotions. And I realized how much all of that striving was feeding my malcontent. So I started to think, well, what if I could reach for some realistic things with this hand and yet be content with what I have right now in the other? Is that balance possibly the way to be content? And how could I achieve this? Well, one of the things I figured out was if I could, in this situation that I couldn't control, do everything I could to make it to make the best of it, which is kind of an obvious thing. But I think it needs to be said. For me, these were just small things. It was cooking in my own room. We had to, buy all this equipment that kept with hospital protocols, but allowed me to pick what food I ate. That was a big deal for me. I was able to order groceries in, and it gave me some control over the situation. I bought a used Wii board. I couldn't exercise a lot, but I could do some of the low impact stuff and stay in shape a little bit, keep my muscles toned so I didn't atrophy as bad after this coming transplant surgery, which I just assumed was coming. I was still striving for that and trying to prepare for it, but I couldn't control when this was going to happen. We got a card table. We played games together. I had my guitar, engaged with the nurses and staff. There was some peace of mind knowing that I'd done all I could do to make the most of this uncontrollable situation that I was in. And then, of course, the whole reason I was there is because I did want something better. I was hoping that I would get a real heart and be able to get back to a normal life. So I was kind of holding both things at the same time. And here's what started to happen. My room 1170 there, it became like this kind of weird safe haven in a way for nurses that were having a bad day. It was our family's living room. It was a place where when the guys would come in to clean, they were welcomed there, and I was happy to see them most days, not all days. That's all I could give in that situation, and I found it easier. Having some control over those things made it easier to survive in this environment that, let's face it, it's a cardiac ICU. It's filled with a lot more endings than beginnings. There are some days where there's a lot of despair and not much hope. But my reaching for something better obviously was shared by everyone there. But our contentment was the thing that kind of made that a safe space. I'd settled into the reality of what was happening and done everything I could to control that, fill it with meaning. But my very choice to be there was the reaching and striving part for something better. And I didn't realize any of that at the time. And I didn't strike that balance every day, most days, to be honest. But there were days that I did, and I found that on those days I was content. And that was a good place to be. Now, in the aftermath, I think the principle still applies. Creatively, I always want to one-up myself and succeed at something new, learn something new, climb a little bit. But I'm restrained right now by the fact that I'm still recovering in a lot of ways. My finances are still recovering. I'm in a different season of life than when all this started 20 years ago in '98. So, again, I'm confronted with this question. Can I be content now in the moment, so that I'm demonstrating kindness and acceptance and appreciation to the people around me rather than frustration and impatience? Well, the answer to that is no. I obviously can't. I have a lot of trouble with it. I struggle with it greatly. I've had a lot of setbacks. I've had rejection a few times. I've had the CMV virus. I'm still recovering from the effects of shingles. And that list goes on because transplants come at the cost of a weakened immune system. This is status quo for me. It's part of life now. But my malcontent comes from the fact that I want more. I want it now, and it makes me frustrated a lot of times. Everyone around me knows it. It's contagious. So that's a bad thing. So I'm trying to find that balance. And as simple as it sounds, in a very practical way, I really believe that contentment just means being clear on what I can control and what I can't. I had little to no control over my health, but I could make informed decisions. I could learn everything there was to learn about heart failure, my disease, transplant process. Couldn't control who my nurse was on a given day, but I could control how I acted and how I treated them. Couldn't control the fact that I couldn't play sports with my kids or go swimming with them or any of these things. But I could find other things to do. We started to game and play RPGs, and we watched movies. And I, most of all, had just real life conversations with them about these frustrations, so they understood this is not neglect. This is not because I don't care. I'm striving and I want something better, but this is the reality of the situation. I failed at that, honestly, more often than I succeeded, but I learned and hopefully got a little bit better at it, and I'm still getting a little bit better at it and getting that perspective. I think it's really a matter of just squaring off with the things you can't change instead of denying it. You just look at it and say, I can't fix this, I can't undo it. This is my norm now. It sucks, it's unfair, it hurts, it's disappointing, but to acknowledge that and then figure out what I can control. How am I spending my time? What are the habits that have developed around this? What is my disposition toward the people that are around me during all this? How much do I know about it? Can I learn more? Can I participate somehow in breaking that and getting out of it? Taking control over the stuff that you have power over, that you can control. It brings a contentment that we're not ever going to gain by just continually raging against the stuff that we don't have any control over. And I'll say that again more for myself than anybody. Taking control of the things over which I do have power, it brings contentment that I'm not ever going to gain by freaking out and raging against the stuff that I can't change. That's the challenge. It was the challenge for me. It's still the challenge for me in the middle of life, in the middle of these things, whatever it is. And I think when you get to the other side of it, like I am now, we don't spend a lot of time talking about the transplant itself. We don't spend a lot of time talking about how it all started. I don't even in the book go into that. And I didn't realize until after I wrote it that I'd left that part out. But those things, it's not that they're irrelevant, they're integral, and very especially the transplant, such an important part of the story. But all the testing and all the things that were difficult that we had to get through to get to that point, it's all there in the middle. And, you want that story to be good. You want it to be, you want to come out looking good as a character in that story who's full of grace and mercy and peace and contentment. And so I think you got to ask yourself continually, like, how is the middle of my story going to look at the end? I wish mine looked different. I do. Perry, who I talk about a lot, he was my 19-year-old friend that had the artificial heart before me and all that. He said something to me one night and that was wise beyond his years, and he did this quite a bit. We were playing this card game Dominion, and he said, Dave, heart transplants, let's be honest, they're a dime a dozen. These surgeons can do these things with their eyes closed at this point. And he's right, they can. He says, we won't be special on the other side of this because we got a transplant. Lots of people have had transplants. He said, but what everybody's going to remember, and he was talking about this in reference to my two kids, my boys. He said, they're going to remember this part. They're going to remember the waiting rooms. They're going to remember the hospital rooms. They're going to remember the blood draws, all the times you got stuck with a needle, the bad food. They're watching you right now. And they're going to remember this part. He's like, we're going to get through the transplant. We'll survive that. The hard part is surviving this. He said, this is where we lose ourselves if we're not real careful. We will lose ourselves along the way. And we do, because we get fixated on things we can't control. I thought that was such a wise thing to come from a 19-year-old. you don't want to cross the finish line and have all this shame and doubt and regret, because you cheated and groveled and kneecapped people to win. You want the victory to be righteous. And I think having that contentment in the middle makes that victory more whole, I guess is a good way to say it. But this is the part where we've got to decide that we're going to either learn that contentment, or we're just going to keep miserably raging against the heavens over things that we really can't do anything about. Whether or not you reach the goal or resolve the problem, that part that makes us, or we find out who we are, I think it's in the middle. And contentment, I think it makes the victory that much more sweet on the other end. So that's really all I know about that. Those are my thoughts about it. They would have been in the book, but again, too long to go into. So thank you for watching. Hopefully that's helpful to any of you that are going through whatever crisis or just the middle of whatever it is right now. There'll be some videos. I'll be posting more videos as time goes on. So thanks for watching. Hope to see you again.